All right, next up we've got Will MacNeil. Hey, Will.
Hey, Chris, how are you?
Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too.
Give us a little background on yourself.
Okay, well, I work at the Mill in London in our design department. I'm a design director, so I get involved in a lot of different projects that involve design, and that's everything kind of linear filmmaking, but also interactive things, apps, installations, designing, just kind of all the way across that. And these days, it's almost all happening in Houdini. A little bit of interactive stuff, a little bit of Unreal, and just starting to get into touch design as well. So I'm trying to get kind of more into the stuff that's not just one way, but it's kind of two-way. It's interactive, and I find that really interesting.
Excellent. What are you going to be talking about today?
I am going to talk about an interactive, a sort of generative art project I've been working on that involves some paint tools that I had previously built, but then turning that into something that is responding to live data. So creating generative paintings like this, but using live weather data to do that. So I built a system where you type a city name in and it will make a painting like that that give you kind of rough idea what the weather looks like. So I'm going to talk about how that works and how a lot of the stuff that I learned while doing that, because I had no idea how to do it when I started.
So cool. Can't wait to learn more about it. Let's jump in.
Okay. Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me on the Hive once again. It's a real thrill to be here. Last time I was on here, I was talking about a tool I developed in Houdini called StrokeIt. And today I'm going to talk about a project that uses StrokeIt, but probably in quite an unusual way, and a way that involves creating data-driven generative art. So what the heck is data-driven generative art? Well, it's a way of designing something like a tool or an asset that can create a lot of different output, in this case images, simply by changing some controls. And in this case, the controls are a live data source. An example of this sort of thing is a job we did at the Mill a few years ago, where we created these 3D sculptures that moved in response to people's biodata as they were given a massage. And as you can see, it not only kind of feels like a sort of living thing rather than a handmade animation, but it also has a sort of metaphorical connection to the real thing. So when you see, the squeezing of the clay sculpture that's driven by the data showing the masseuse's touch, it kind of conveys a sense of skin being massaged. But the whole thing is that once it's set up, the actual animation itself is being motivated or driven by data sources. So just a little recap previously on Houdini Hive. This is StrokeIt, and this is the sort of painting setup that I built inside Houdini. So it's kind of in two parts, and the first part is that it's a system for creating geometry that looks a lot like oil paint strokes. And it does this through a series of logical controls, things like stroke width, wobbliness, color mixing, etc. And all this stuff kind of is really aimed at kind of creating the sense of realistic paint strokes. The other part of StrokeIt is a system for turning 2D images into a series of curves that kind of mimic the way an artist might actually look at an image and paint it. So you start with an image, and then StrokeIt starts to break it down into different parts based on color, and then it uses that as a kind of motivation for creating these outlines, which then in turn become what it interprets to be the artistic strokes. And then it brings the color back into it. And then finally, it creates actual paint strokes. So it's kind of using the paint geometry that was created in the first bit to then match with the curves that were created in the second bit. And it creates these fairly realistic paintings like this. So here's some actual renders of paintings. You can see it's got that kind of relief in it. It's quite fun. And it does all this stuff pretty much automatically. You can manipulate a lot of controls, but basically, it's kind of allows you to create the strokes really much by feeding in an image, and you get all kinds of cool different results depending on what kind of image you feed into it. So I got thinking that if autotrace can work on any 2D image, surely it can also work on some sort of generative image like a pattern or a noise. So you can see here, I've fed in some curl noise and then allowed the auto trace system to kind of just turn that into images. So you can see it's just some curl noise. The auto trace system is basically just turning that into some kind of paint stroke. And just by changing settings, you get a lot of different results. And it's really important to note with something like this is you don't really have a lot of control over it. You're just kind of allowing it to do what it does. And sometimes things turn out really great, and sometimes they don't turn out great at all. You just kind of have to let that happen and figure out what you like. So I messed around with this for a while and eventually started to get something I did like. And, it starts to feel a little bit like calligraphy, the way an artist might move their hand over the canvas with a brush, kind of giving that sense of energy and expression that I really love. And it doesn't necessarily feel that digital. It feels a lot more kind of expressive. So I got pretty excited about that. And I tried a lot of different things, messed around with different colors, and different kind of surface techniques and whatnot. And of course, when you do something like this, you can animate it, because all you really have to do is change one setting at a time and cache it, and then you get lots and lots of different results. And basically, it's the same thing with different colors each time. And I thought about this for a while, and I thought, well, what can I do with this? It's more than just kind of random strokes, or just something I'm going to stick on Instagram, something that people might actually like or connect with. And I hit upon this idea that these things kind of reminded me of weather. They kind of feel like, storms. So what would happen if I fed weather data into them? So jump ahead a long way, and this is what I came up with. This is a system of bringing data into Houdini and turning that into images that represent the weather. And you can do this wherever you want and whenever you want. So, they feel a lot like swirling atmospheres, light, moisture. And so really what I needed to do to achieve this was build a system inside Houdini that would take a name of a city, go get the weather information for that city, bring it back into Houdini, and then use that to drive this system and create an image. So this is the result, and it's something I call Distral. And, I think it turned out pretty well. It, creates kind of not necessarily something you would use as like a weather forecast, but something you would just use as a really pretty way of kind of expressing what the weather felt like at that time. So what I'm going to do now is kind of take you through the process of how I went from that idea to what you've got here. And, I'd say it was a pretty elaborate process. Before I explain exactly how it works, I want to explain that, I jumped into this totally blind. I had this idea of kind of what I wanted to do. I had Stroke It already built, and I had some test renders, but I had no idea what would be involved in actually making this happen, because there's a lot of things that it needed to do that I didn't know how to do, like connect to the internet, get weather information, turn that into something that would actually make images. And I know this is going to sound like a kind of plug for Houdini here, but what I loved about this project at the start is knowing that Houdini would be able to do it. Like whatever I needed to figure out and whatever kind of tools I needed to bring into it, I knew that Houdini would be able to do it. And that's a really wonderful feeling, kind of knowing that the software you're using is open enough and extensible enough that you can pretty much make it do anything. And, I just had that confidence going into it, which is really quite cool. Another little bit of advice that I will share before I get into the actual nitty-gritty of this is when you do something like this, things that you expect to be really difficult can actually turn out to be quite easy. And I'll explain some of those along the way. Conversely, things that you expect to be totally easy can really suck. So, this is kind of a project that I did for fun. And, I thought about it as I was doing it. It had things that I wanted to learn how to do. But it also had, kind of sense of going into the unknown. Like I didn't really know how to do this stuff. And I kind of had to prepare myself for it being, slightly painful at times. And it was. But other things, like I said, were a lot easier than I thought. So here we go. The first thing I needed to do was find a source for weather data. So I popped a message on Twitter asking for suggestions, and within 30 minutes or less, I had a few replies. And this one came from a friend of mine called Florian, who suggested this thing called openweathermap.org. And so basically, this is just a service. It's online. For the most part, it's free, and it allows you to access weather from up to 200,000 cities around the world, current weather data. I think it gets sampled every 10 minutes, so it's pretty current. And what you do is you sign up for it. Like I said, it's free, unless you're going to build it into a big app, in which case you would need to subscribe and pay. They give you this thing called an API code, which is basically just a number that's specific to you. And in your browser, you type in a URL that includes the name of the city that you want to get the weather for and your API code. So this goes into like the top line of your browser. And at the end, you get something like this. So this is a JSON file, and JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. This is actually the first time I ever realized what a JSON file actually is. Heard the term all the time, but here we go. And you can see it's a really nicely organized batch of words and numbers that represent the weather in, I don't know, a city like Chicago or something like that. And, some of the numbers like cloudiness really mean something to me. It's a percentage, that's fine. Others were a total mystery. But for now, I could see that this would be fine. And just so you know, there's all kinds of free data like this out there. I've noticed there are about 100,000 different APIs out there for data that you can get for free and plug into anything you want. Some of it's real time, some of it's more like kind of census data, that sort of stuff. But you can go crazy with this sort of thing. So the next thing I need to do is figure out how to get this data into Houdini. Once again, a little bit of a search online, and found this tutorial by a chap called David Cow, who does a lot of Houdini tutorials. There are a lot of them on the SideFX website. David also has a Patreon, which I subscribe to now. And, this was an extremely helpful tutorial, not only in that it kind of showed me exactly what I needed to do, but really, I just needed to copy it and maybe figure out a few places where I needed to tweak. So this uses Python, which is just obviously a programming language, but a Python node inside Houdini is just a node you pull up and allows you to enter code into it. And I don't know how to read or write Python, but it doesn't matter because what I had in David's tutorial was just a very clear explanation of how to set up a system that will read a JSON file and then pull information off of that and store it into attributes inside Houdini. And that is something I do know how to work with. And that's basically what I did. I created code that copies very carefully what David did, just changing it for the various values that I needed to get into my system. And you can see there's a lot of different types of data. So you've got integers and floats and strings, which are text. And this is just like the raw values coming into Houdini from that JSON file. And so, the JSON file is stored on your hard drive, and you just tell Houdini to read it and tell it which bits you want, and then that comes in and gets stored onto points or details or whatever you want to put it on. And I'm not doing anything with it, trying to process it yet, just trying to get it into Houdini. If you change the JSON file that it's pointing to, then the data values will change with it. The next step was to make this a little bit more automatic. So rather than having to go online, put in a URL, get the data stored on your drive and load it in, I wanted to do this inside of Houdini. And this is one of the great things about Python is that it allows you to basically acquire libraries of functionality that other people have created and use them without really knowing that much about how they work. So in this case, this library is called requests. And what it does is allows you to get a bunch of functionality into your script that will go and read information off the internet. So basically, this is the part that goes and gets that data off of the website and brings it into Houdini. So now I don't ever need to actually leave Houdini to get this stuff by using this functionality in my Python script. Basically, all I have to do inside Houdini is change the name of the city, like I'm doing here, and my data will update automatically. So you see there, I type in Miami, and the data on the left side changes. Where are we going here? Barcelona. Oh, wouldn't it be good to be in Barcelona? Yeah, and you can see as that comes in, all the other stuff changes. And that's really the functionality I wanted, was basically to be in here and type in a new city and have my image, my weather image, update automatically to follow that. So now that I've got all the data into Houdini, I want to start applying it to my design. And I think I should point out here that this is not data viz. I'm not like trying to, create something that is going to be used by scholars or city planners or anything like that. I'm just really trying to make something pretty. So, I'm comfortable being subjective with this stuff and adding a lot of my own spin. But obviously there's a whole industry out there in data visualization that would probably freak out about what I'm going to show you here. All of the values that were coming in from the weather file, of all of the values coming in, I decided to pare my system down to use just a few: wind speed, temperature, time, cloud cover, and the main weather description text, which came in handy for flagging up rain and snow. In a perfect world, I would just take values like wind speed and, after a bit of range mapping, pipe them into parts of the system, such as turbulence in the noise pattern that creates the painting shape. But it's often hard to keep creating nice images when some values just produce kind of ugly results. So instead of this kind of full spectrum of values piping directly into the system, I quantized the wind values into steps, 6 steps. And each of those 6 VOPs you see contains a slightly different noise pattern. And this means I can have results that look close to weather conditions and also always looked interesting. So what's happening there is that switch down below, the one that says switch 4, that's what's being changed by the data coming in. So the data is getting quantized into 6 different values, and then it's just changing which input it uses in that switch, depending on which value is coming in. On top of all this, I built a random seed based on the time and the city name, so that no matter what happens, every time you update it, you always get a slightly different result, but not a result that's so massively different that it doesn't look nice and still have roughly the same kind of meaning. Wind speed in its own doesn't really link to precipitation. So for rain and snow, I built a separate switch, or 2 switches, and they actually check the weather description for the words either rain or snow. And then if those words are in there, in that string, then it overrides the whole setup and either turns on the rain setting or the snow setting. So now I have this grayscale version of the image based on the weather character. So like all of that stuff so far has basically just created the shape of the lines. And I had to do something kind of similar for the color. So that's a mixture of temperature and time of day. Temperature comes in as a Kelvin value. So that's, you need to subtract 273 to turn that into a Celsius value, and you need to do some other crazy math to turn that into Fahrenheit. But basically I just then took that in, and you can see there's that remapped value just below the temperature one, and that again drives a switch. So in this case, we have like 5 different temperature settings that are basically driving the color. So, but temperature on its own doesn't really depict the color of the sky. So one thing I wanted to bring in was time. So that would be a variant on this as well. And this is one of the things that turned out to be a little harder than I thought, but also a little bit fun. So time comes in as this thing called Unix time or epoch time. And you can see that one big number there, 1619173480. And what that is actually is counting up seconds from the beginning of 1970. And I guess that's when time started for computer companies. So what I wanted to do was somehow convert that big epoch time number into a normalized value that would basically represent the beginning of the day to the end of the day. So 0 would be midnight, and 0 would be midnight in the morning, and 1 would be midnight in the evening, and 0.5 would be midday. I actually spent quite a while trying to figure out how to do this, and eventually I realized that Unix time has this magic number, 86,400, and that's how many seconds there are in a day. So if you use modulus, with that value. So basically you take the incoming epoch time and you use that 86400 in a modulus. What you're left with is the number of seconds that have elapsed in that day, because basically the modulus is kind of like a remainder. So once you have that value, that's kind of how many seconds between, how many seconds have elapsed since midnight this morning. So then what I wanted to do is turn that into a value that, was this sort of normalized number. So basically then you just take that current value, which was 37480, and divide by the full number of the magic number, 86400, and you get a number like 0.43, which is kind of where you are in the day. So that would be somewhere like 11 o'clock in the morning. I then remapped this value one more time, so it turned into a value going from 0 to 19, giving me 20 options, and it drives this switch that then creates all these different color schemes. So basically what you have is now color based on a mixture of time of day and also the temperature. And this whole system I think is a bit messy. I really wish that this one thing I could get a little bit better, because I think this could be a lot more kind of clever if it directly mapped temperature, if the sort of gradients were controlled directly by time of day and temperature. And I think this is something that happens to me a lot in using Houdini, is you are always aware that there's a better way of doing something. And what I try to do is not constantly just stop and think, oh, there's a better way to do this, but actually try to get through something. And then if I feel I need to, I can go back later and make it a little bit more efficient, which is probably the reason why anyone who opens one of my Houdini scenes hates me. What you see now is basically how this thing works inside Houdini. So you go in, change the city name. Any day now, change the city name. There we go. And give it a couple of seconds and the system will update. Change it again and the system will update again. And basically what's happening here is you're seeing a live reaction to the weather inside Houdini. This is all happening inside Houdini. Obviously, these aren't renders. They're just viewport views. But you can see as you go across, you get all these different values. So it's a bit cloudy in Miami. Let's see what else we got here. London. What's it going to be like in London? Strangely sunny around midday in London. There you go. That's the distral setup inside Houdini, which I think is kind of neat. The next step in all of this was to start thinking about how I can make this something a lot more kind of real-time and shareable. So this is something I did that actually turned out to be quite easy, and this was just moving the whole thing into Unreal. So this is a Houdini asset running inside Unreal, and you can see basically the same thing. You just change the city name. It updates a little bit quicker, and as soon as you actually turn off, sort of deselect the object, you're now looking at basically a render. And inside Unreal, this image could be output at 8K with relatively no problem almost instantly. So there's no render time. And down the road, the idea here is to create something that's genuinely real time. Maybe you could go to a website, put in the location you want, and have this screen that's just constantly updating, kind of giving you this sort of view of your city. Maybe it become your desktop or something like that, or maybe it's something you could actually put on your wall, like on some sort of 20-inch flat screen monitor. Could just be up there all the time. So that's kind of where I'm going with it. I've still got a few things to figure out to make sure that's all going to work. You can see actually that doesn't look too bad up close, and that's live and inside Unreal. I also did some prints. These are from Arnold renders inside Houdini, and I thought these really looked good. They're rendered using printed using archival paper and giclée. I don't know. Nice printing, and they turned out really good. So this is another thing I've been experimenting with, is just printing some up. This one you see here is actually one I have printed, and the weather is from my town where I live in Kent, in England, and we have it framed up on the wall, and it looks kind of nice. That's all the time I've got. Thank you very much for watching. That's my Twitter handle and Instagram handle down on the bottom left. Come say hello and have a great day. Thanks very much.